I think we should get going.
Okay. Great. So I'm Jeff Bagg. I'm the city planner in Easthampton, and I want to thank everyone who's joining us now. And I think I'll say that we're going to record this meeting, and we will share it back out. Although some of the interactive questions may not be accessible, but we do want to share the information as we move along on this project. So I'm really happy and impressed and glad to be working with Dylan Sussman and Dan Shaw from Dodson and Flinker. They're a landscape architecture design firm right next door in Florence. And so we are working with Dodson at this point to come up with a conceptual design for a trail on this property in Easthampton on East Street. And just for a quick introduction, this has been a project that's been envisioned for many, many years, but since about early 2008 is when the city really started to work with its partners, Kestrel Land Trust and Pascomic Conservation Trust, to try to acquire 23 acres in Easthampton adjacent to Mount Tom. And what it really started with was in early 2018, the owner of the property proposed a 9-house lot subdivision. And it's pretty common in the planning world for sometimes people to say, well, if you want to protect it, then you can buy it. And that often doesn't work without a willing landowner. So in this case, the landowner gave us a year to do some due diligence and gather funds, and we applied for a grant. We're awarded the grant, and with the support of the Community Preservation Act Committee, the city and Kestrel bought the property. And the vision all along has been to create a new access point to the trails on Mount Tom. And we've articulated a clear vision with the state in acquiring the property, that the goal was really to create a small parking area on East Street and try to serve as many different types of users as possible. And so right from day one, the vision has been to provide a trail that is accessible for people with mobility issues to this vantage point on the property. And then a secondary trail would provide a more moderate hike for people who are, maybe not avid hikers, but want to get outside. And then finally, the third user group is more avid hikers who are trying to access the New England Scenic Trail. So with that in mind, that's been the goal all along. And we've been working diligently to keep momentum going. And part of this project is kind of the final step to come up with a conceptual design that we're going to use to apply for funding from the state. Again, the same program funds acquisition and construction in July. So we have about 30 days to finish up, this application and requests. And if we're awarded, we would hope to hear about the award maybe in November. And being optimistic, from there we would go into final design and preparation of construction drawings with a goal of maybe trying to start construction next spring. So as of right now, nothing is set in stone. We do need the grant from the state to really move this forward, but this is part of the process. So I think with that, I would like to hand it over to Dodson and Flinker and give the overview of where we've been and where we're headed.
Hey everybody, this is Dylan Sussman from Dodson and Flinker. I show up as Dodson and Flinker. If you want to give us feedback during the meeting, feel free to send a chat to Dodson and Flinker. It'll come to me. And then we can respond to those later on. I'm sharing the results with you, which hopefully you see on your screen from that quick poll we did. It looks like most of the people who responded to this poll either attended the previous meeting or looked at the slideshow of it. So that means that we're going to go quickly through the overview of the site and information about past designs. And thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Shaw, who's going to do a presentation to show you where we're at.
Thanks, Dylan. Hi, I'm Dan Shaw. I'm a landscape architect at Dodson and Flinker. I work with Dylan. And today we're going to share with you the stage where we're at in the design process for Mount Tom North Trailhead Park. So we're going to have a presentation where I'm going to run through the background of the project, some site analysis, the public outreach we had, the design concepts we shared, and then the design we've arrived at so far. And then we'll have time at the end for a bit of question and answers. And our objectives are to, share these results from where we're at in the process right now and get a little bit more feedback from you all. But what we're going to present is pretty well, at this point, the course that the design is most likely to take. Some basics about using Zoom. If you want to give us any comments during this presentation, send them to Dylan. So click on the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and where you choose who to send comments to, choose Dodson and Flinker. It'll go to Dylan because I'm going to be talking. I won't have time to read them as they come in. So here's where we're at. We've been working on this project throughout the spring. We had public outreach and development of design concepts, which we shared and got feedback on. And now we're at the stage of sharing the final conceptual design with you all. And then that'll get us ready to move forward to get funding for final design and construction of this, as Jeff was telling us. Back in April, we had a public meeting on Zoom that many of you were at. And after that, we launched an online survey asking many of the same questions and sharing what we had come up with. And we got a lot of good responses from that, as well as a paper survey sent to houses in the area. And
hey,
the respondent.
Dan, it sounds like we're having that trouble with the poll blocking your screen. So I think if you end your screen sharing and open it up again.
Yeah. Is it better now?
I think so, yeah. I think so.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff.
There was a pop-up window blocking it? Okay. So the respondents to the survey, because we asked demographic questions in the surveys, skewed a little more towards active hikers and people who use trails frequently. But we did get valuable responses from people who need accessibility features, who need 5% slopes and ADA features, either because of mobility impairments or just other uses. And so that was important to pay attention to, because one of our goals in this project, probably the main goal, is to create a trail that's accessible to the widest range of people possible. There's plenty of places where you can access Mount Tom in the area if you're a really athletic hiker who can scramble up steep trails. There's fewer places where you can get up in elevation and get into nature in a wheelchair or while pushing a stroller or something like that. So we want to create a usable space here for people who are limited to handicap accessible trails. And that's where the former house site that has an overlook is important. And we'll get into that in a minute, as well as creating connections to the long distance trails. In our surveys, we saw, everyone who responded to the survey was interested in walking and hiking. About half of the people who responded, or a little more than half, would be interested in passive, seated activities, bird watching, that sort of thing. And where people's interest drops off a little more is event spaces, playgrounds, things that you'd associate with a more urban park. So our project site is in the northeast corner of the city of Easthampton, on the northern tip of Mount Tom on East Street. Zooming in here, the project is a combination of city land that was recently acquired. It used to be a house lot with a house used to sit up at the top of the hill, and Kestrel Land Trust conservation land with this feature called Little Mountain. And together it's a little over 20 acres, and it's being treated basically as one park. It's situated between the Manhan Rail Trail and the New England Trail, which is a hiking trail that goes up Mount Tom and connects across the region from Connecticut to New Hampshire. And this site's position between these two places creates the opportunity for someone to arrive here on a bicycle, park nearby, and then kind of come up to this area and jump on the New England Trail if they want to do a combined biking, hiking day. This site could provide the missing link for that. Currently, the New England Trail comes down Mount Tom, and the trailhead orients towards Underwood Avenue. So people who want to hike this way currently park informally in this residential neighborhood on Underwood Avenue and then walk up the Eversource utility easement to the trailhead that's up here, and then they come up. So one of the goals for this project is to hopefully be able to reroute the trailhead, which is on DCR land, to orient towards our project site over here, where we're hoping to provide a formal parking area, an accessible ADA-friendly trail, and then connections to that trailhead. So this is what the site looks like from a drone photo up in the air, looking back the other way. You see Mount Tom in the background. Little Mountain here is sticking up. This outline is the property line, but Little Mountain is the bulbing tree line here. It's a big prominent feature. And we've got the utility corridor behind it and the former house site up at the top with a pretty clear view. So the different environments on the site, we have a flat grassy area by the street where we could fit some parking spaces for access. It moves up into an open forest, kind of a mature maple birch forest. And then there's a successional meadow moving over this way that's growing quickly into an early successional forest. But currently, when you're up at the degraded former house site, you still get some views over that meadow, but probably not for much longer at the rate that the meadow's growing. And then much more mature forest up on the Kestrel land where Little Mountain is. It's a mix of hemlocks, mature oaks, maples, and a mix of native understory shrubs. So looking at a plan of the site that analyzes the slopes, this is East Street down here, the utility corridor up in the back. So the flat places, which are shaded the lightest, and the steep places, or the darker shades here, show us that down on East Street, we have a flat area where we could fit those parking spaces, and up at the top, there's a flat area where we could develop that overlook park-like place. But in between, most of the site is pretty well sloped, and what that means for us is to get a handicap accessible trail in here, it's going to require a set of switchbacks. We can't just charge straight up the sill because that would be too steep. We want to find a way to route the trail back and forth along the contours. We'll get into that in a moment. This is what the access to the site looks like from East Street. The city-owned property is about 50 feet wide, which would give us about the bare minimum for a driveway and one row of right-angle parking spaces. And then moving up from that potential parking space, we come into a meadow that has views into the forest beyond. And once we get into the woods, there's this open character to this portion of the forest here. There's not a lot of understory. There's kind of long views through the trees, even in the summer when a little more foliage is leafed out. A few interesting features along the way. There's a spring, a few old stone walls, mixed ages of forest type, including some stands of saplings. And then up at the top of the forest, looking out through the forest edge, we start to see the former house site, which is a clearing currently, and we can see Little Mountain appearing on that Kestrel-owned land beyond. And when we emerge from the forest, there's this quality of bursting out through the thick forest edge into this clearing, which reveals the view of Little Mountain beyond and the distant hills. The former house site currently is in haphazard, rough shape. It has this sandy pit where a swimming pool in the basement used to be, and it has crumbling asphalt where the driveway and access to the old garage used to be. So the site is open and clear, but it's in disrepair and would need to be cleaned up one way or another for it to be user-friendly for the public. It has great views this is from the high point of the site. There's a big oak tree that's kind of a focal point near the foot of Little Mountain. So we're standing up on the berm by the oak tree looking out, and we can see the distant hills to the northwest even in summer, where they're a little bit obscure, there's still a decent view up there, but soon the successional meadow down below will grow up into a successional forest, and it'll block those views. The homeowner previously who had their house here owned that meadow, and they used to mow the whole thing as basically a lawn going all the way down the hill to preserve that view. So we're probably looking, as part of this project, at selective vegetation clearing to maintain more of a shrub meadow, but not a full-fledged successional forest that blocks the views. And this is what that meadow looks like today. There's a lot of white pines, quaking aspens, things that are going to quickly take advantage of the open sunny spot here and grow really tall. And there's also a mix of invasives like autumn olive, bittersweet. So it's a real tangle in there that's going to require some kind of management to give it that ecological value that we want out of a shrub habitat and to preserve the views for the top of the site. Turning around, looking back up, this is what the former house site looks like. Kind of degraded, but open. And this drone photo shows you pretty well how we've got that crumbling asphalt, but like the sandy pit where the topography is just kind of wildly undulating where the house used to be. Moving up into Little Mountain, it's a much more mature, mixed hardwood forest. There's rocky outcroppings up at the top. There's a steep climb to get up there. It's impossible to get a handicap accessible trail up to the top of this, but for a more casual athletic hiker, you can easily get up to the top of this. When you're at the top of Little Mountain, you're in the forest canopy. There's filtered views out to the Oxbow beyond. In the summer, it really is an enclosed space up here. The long views you're going to get are from the house site down below. Little Mountain is more of a miniature hiking on Mount Tom kind of feel, which has its own special quality to it. Moving behind our project site is this power corridor, which is the closest thing to public access we have today, where folks park down on Underwood Ave and they walk up the Eversource easement here, and it comes to the New England trailhead. So as I mentioned, we want to reroute that trailhead over to this project that we're designing. So in April, we shared some preliminary design options and got your input on them, and we shared that out in the public surveys too on the internet. We looked at a couple of ways to get a trail up here. And so remember, again, we want to find ways to get a 5% trail nice and easy up that slope so that it's friendly for people with mobility issues and for all users. So that's what the orange line represents in this map. The gray line represents a more informal, rugged trail for hiking for more ambitious user, more like able-bodied, more like a hiking trail. The orange one is the line for everybody to use. It's fully accessible. So we looked at routing the switchbacks through the meadow here. We call that the shrub meadow maze because that walk would have kind of a hidden and revealed views quality to it as we walk through the restored shrubland habitat. Then we looked at another concept that keeps more of the accessible trail fully in the woods, but wraps around the edges of the forest a little bit. Since there's not a lot of understory, you would see the switchbacks if it switched back too frequently. So we tried to route it along the edges of the woods and then comes up out at the top of the open part of the site. So we call that the woods walk and the dramatic reveal, so that you're in the woods more of the walk, and then you come out all at once and see Little Mountain and the views beyond. And in asking everyone about it, people preferred the idea of the woods walk that opens up at the top of the site all at once with that dramatic reveal. And then people also answered that an accessible trail generally would be beneficial for them directly or for someone that they know. So we asked about surfacing types for the accessible portion of the trail, and we saw a mix of responses that looks a little contradictory at first, but we think that there's good insight here to be gleaned. Asphalt paving was a lot of people's last choice, but it was also a lot of people's first choice. And knowing about the requirements for wheelchair-friendly, accessible trails. We know that firm, stable surfaces work the best. So on the other hand, we have a lot of avid hikers, people who want to see this site restored to a natural condition, who don't want to see a kind of, that associated with like an ugly asphalt, urban looking material here. And that's where an simple earth graded trail got a lot of support too. It aesthetically is appropriate here. That kind of leads us, there's a good argument to be made for both, because we want that portion of the trail to be serving user groups who don't have other places to hike that are accessible. We want to make sure that there is a naturalistic looking but still firm and stable surface type that's wheelchair and stroller friendly. And that's where some kind of stone dust, compacted crushed rock is probably the way to go. So then we looked at design concepts for a picnic and overlook area up at the top of the former house site. And we shared a variety of sketches that show different uses and different design approaches to that area. So the basic lawn, that was the first one. It takes the rough, irregular former house site and smooths it out into a gentle, evenly sloped picnicking lawn. This would be the most low-cost option. We just have a simple trail going through it, and people could spread picnic blankets out and look at the view. The second option takes that same approach to smoothing out and repairing the site and restoring it, and then adds a treehouse to it, or maybe that's a viewing deck with a handicap-friendly ramp going up to it. Some kind of fun and playful focal point that would be a built structure that raises you up above the ground a little bit to enhance the view. And that got a lot of support, we can see. This is the result of the online survey down below. Then we shared a series of designs that took advantage of the topography. We're saying if we already are going to get bulldozers out to smooth out the rough, abandoned site to get rid of that divot where the swimming pool used to be, why not mound the land to create some of that effect of the treehouse of getting up high and enhancing the view with landform, which would be naturalistic looking, it would be low cost, it would be low maintenance. So we tried a couple of options that took advantage of sculpting the topography. So the mounds creates a playful series of little mini foothills that have little mountain in the background and create a playful landscape. Without having a playground in here, kids would run around on these little mounds. Different people could climb up on top of them and have multiple high points with a view. So it's not just one platform that everyone's waiting their turn to get onto. Then we had a concept called the rolling hills, which, like the mounds, shapes the topography, but does it in a more picturesque, naturalistic, subtle way, where we have a large arcing berm with an ADA trail going up to the top of it, providing views along the way, a flat space where you could have picnic tables in the middle, and then kind of a bowl of land with some smaller mounds on the edge of it going down towards the meadow. Then we took that topography and explored paving parts of it with like a plaza, retaining walls, and making it usable as an event space. We wanted to push it and see what people thought if we were to invite and encourage larger gatherings up here. Would that be appropriate? And we saw both in the public meeting and the online survey a lot of resistance to that. Like, that goes beyond the limit. People were clearly saying, let's not have large, noisy gatherings up here. Let's keep it to be something that's naturalistic, but probably playful, like the treehouse or the mounds, while looking naturalistic and fitting into the environment that's here. So we took a step back, tried to say, what does it all mean? All of the responses that we got from everybody at the public meeting. And at the public meeting, I should mention, there was a lot of support for the rolling hills concept. So we thought there's going to be an important user group here that we want to put front and center. Those are people who are going to be limited to a firm, stable path that's graded at 5%, that's handicap accessible. For those users, we want to make sure that this former house site provides a satisfying destination that's designed enough that it feels like you've really been somewhere worthwhile. Whereas other people are going to use it as a launching off point for Mount Tom, we still want to create something unique here. We want to keep the site looking natural. We want to preserve and enhance the shrubland habitat, create resting places along the way, consider long-term maintenance. So that's where the treehouse idea is a really great idea that had strong support from people who liked it. In reality, it would be expensive to build a structure that intensive and to maintain it. So that's where we're thinking maybe deliberately taking advantage of the landform on the site to create a playful focal point, to create a high point that takes advantage of the views. And then while we're at it, to mitigate the impacts on the neighbors visually, since we're going to be inviting the public on the trails here, wherever it comes close to neighbors' properties. So that leads us to the schematic design that we've developed at this point, which we're going to walk through right now. So this overview plan has a variety of different elements. We're looking at the whole site. The city of Easthampton's land is on this half, the Kestrel land is on this half, Mount Tom is up above, East Street is down at the bottom. So we would have, looking at the parking area, I'll start at the bottom and I'll work my way up, walking through these areas. We've got probably space for about 9 parking spaces here. And then in light gray, the trail here would be that handicap accessible switchback coming up to a loop up at the picnic and overlook area. And then the darker brown trails would be informal earth trails that traverse up and down steeper slopes and are more like the hiking trails you would find on Mount Tom. Along the way, these blue boxes represent signage. There's a little symbol for benches. It would be important to have resting places along the way for an accessible trail. We wouldn't want to go too often without having places for people to sit. And along the way, we could mix in informational signage about the habitat types and the environments that we're seeing through here. So the trail would walk up through the first meadow on the city's property and then into the woods. Would branch off where you could cut through the meadow and go up towards Little Mountain, or you would stay on the accessible trail, arcing back through the woods up the hill. It goes this way because we're traversing along the contour to make it a nice, even, mild slope for the trail. And then it arcs around and emerges out of the woods for that big reveal into the open picnic and overlook area, which I'll share a detailed plan for in a moment. And that would provide picnic tables, benches along the accessible trail, and then rolling grassy landforms for picnicking, for kids to play on, that would kind of naturalistically feather into the managed shrub meadow habitat below. And then once you're at the picnic and overlook area, there's trail connections up Mount Tom to the New England Trail, and then this loop around and up to the top of Little Mountain. Some ideas for signage along the way, like I was saying, we could have signs, an informational kiosk at the parking area down below that would orient you to where you are and where you can go from here with a map. And then signs along the way that could tell you about the history of how this site has transformed over time and how the ecology has shifted over time. Signs about the geology for Mount Tom, for Little Mountain and the valley, because we have this really fascinating, unique geology right here with Little Mountain and Mount Tom. And signs about the vegetation and animal and plant habitats or species and habitats that are here, as well as directional signage wherever there's a junction in the trails. And this diagram shows places where it would be important to be conscious of having privacy screening with vegetation where the trail would come closer to neighbors' properties. There's not a lot of understory vegetation in the woods here, so in this general area, we would want to look closely at the lines of sight from the trail we create and making sure that there's privacy for these neighbors over here. privacy along the edges of the parking lot down at the bottom with arborvitae hedges or with a privacy fence. And then there's a spot here where the trail around Little Mountain comes close to people's backyards, and creating some privacy screening with vegetation there would be important also. And then probably part of that would be a few signs that let you know that it's private property beyond this line, and so to stay on the trail. So this is zooming in on the parking area to take a look at what we think could fit here. The frontage on East Street is only 50 feet wide, but that gives us enough space to have 36 feet of width for a lane to access and 18-foot depth parking spaces that are 90 degrees. We would want a couple of these to be ADA compliant parking spaces with an unloading striped space next to them. And, you know, we could debate maybe 3 of these are ADA. If we want, you know, users who don't have opportunity to hike elsewhere, who need to use a wheelchair coming to this site, we want to make sure that they have enough space to park. So that's something we'll look at, is what's the optimal balance of ordinary, like just 9-foot parking spaces versus those ADA spaces. And then we would put probably boulders or some kind of bollard to prevent vehicles from going up onto the trails, bike parking at the trailhead, and an informational kiosk. And then there's an existing mature arborvitae hedge on this side, which we would prune and use to the extent we can for privacy against this neighbor. And then since the remaining space would be kind of narrow, probably a privacy fence on that side for the other residential neighbor. Then moving up onto the trail, looking at trail types is an important aspect of this project. It seems like a detail, but it's such a long trail that we want to get it right and make sure that the way we navigate up through the woods and get up to the park is designed correctly for our target user groups. So in the area, we have Mutters Field right down the road is a wheelchair-friendly, accessible trail made of stone dust, which is a good material that works well. And that's probably what we're looking at. We think that paving the whole thing with asphalt would be too heavy-handed, but having it just be a loose earth trail wouldn't provide the stability we need for that, 5-foot width, wheelchair-friendly trail we want to create. So something along the lines of these images we're seeing here. There's places on the trail where it gets steep where we probably want to have a little bit of edging on the uphill and downhill sides. And so this is a picture taken from the internet that we think probably represents the look and feel of the trail we want to create through the woods here. We're thinking about 5-foot width, allows passing for 2 wheelchairs. Probably a stone dust that's, to get technical, like 3/8" minus crushed rock that also has fine sands in it so it can really get compacted firm without being like paved, like you think of concrete or something like that. It's loose, but it's firm. It would be compacted. And then there'd probably be a little bit of cutting and filling on the uphill and downhill sides of a lot of the trail, a little bit of tree clearing to get it along the contour of this wooded sloping site that we have. So we would develop details for a crushed rock path. This is a diagram of what a 5% slope looks like. We keep using that term, but that's what the Architectural Access Board recommends for a wheelchair-friendly trail is 5% would be the steepest path. So that's 1 foot of rise over 20 foot of run. And it looks like this. And the idea is it's not the same as a handicap ramp that gets you up to a building. It's a trail. It's considered a little bit more rugged. You're trying to go out into nature, but it's as long as there's landings along the way and places to rest, it's considered a handicap-friendly trail. And then we would develop a detail for clearing, selective clearing of vegetation through the trail corridor and creating that flat space for the trail to go through. So coming up to the top of the accessible trail is our design for the picnic and overlook area. And in the schematic design that we've arrived at right now, we were looking at the survey responses and the responses from the public meeting, and we decided to try to combine the concepts that we called the treehouse, the mounds, and the rolling hills into this design here, which combines elements of all of those things. So for this park area, you would come up, and the accessible trail paved in gray with stone dust or crushed stone would continue to ramp up to a high point here to get the maximum view, and it would close in on itself with a loop that comes around this way, like that. So that somebody limited to a wheelchair could access most of the features in this picnic and overlook area. Generally, what we're doing here is trying to just move the earth around and play sandbox with this site that already needs to be repaired with its swimming pool and everything that's kind of haphazardly shaped, to create a series of like little foothills, you could call them, against Little Mountain. Currently, the way the site is now, the high point of the site kind of runs along these edges here. So with the least amount of effort, by borrowing a little bit of earth down in this space and creating a low bowl, you can pile that land up here and create a series of little mounds graded gently so that you can still run a handicap accessible slope up the berm to the top. And then it would ramp down to these playful little foothills. And then the steep sides of them on this side would be 3-to-1 slopes maximum. So it's nothing crazy. It's the steepest slope that a lawnmower can still easily maintain. And it's the steepest slope without having to have retaining walls and anything expensive like that. So we're looking at low maintenance, but still having a fun, playful series of mounds that then surrounds a flat central lawn for picnicking. Folks could still sit on the slopes going up to the mounds if they wanted to enjoy the view. And then getting down towards the shrub meadow, more of a enclosed, smaller bowl lawn that rolls down the hill towards the meadow. Most of it would be open and sunny, but the edges along the trail would be kind of in the existing trees that are there, and we would probably plant a few more trees to give shade to that edge of the site. The important thing about having most of the site clear is to have those views out to the hills beyond, since that's one of the goals, is to create an overlook here. So this is a view of what you would see when you emerge from the trail right here, looking towards Little Mountain. That's what it looks like today. And so the idea would be to create that wheelchair-friendly, gentle ramp trail up to the top, where you'd have picnic tables and amenities in the shade, but looking out at the view to the hills to the north. And then it would sneak around behind the mounds over here and then work its way around a flat central lawn space in the middle for picnicking. And then the next view here is if we were to walk up the trail this way and stand here and look out, that's what it currently looks like. And that's currently the nicest view on the site because it's the high point. And this is the idea of what it would look like after you clear away that broken asphalt, smooth out the topography of the swimming pool used to be into a flat lawn that rolls down into a kind of bowl below it that feathers into the meadow, which would be maintained as a shrub habitat instead of a successional forest. And you'd see off to the side a little bit of that playful idea of the mounds or the treehouse idea we were getting at, of having something that little kids would still run up and down and roll on these hills off to the edge next to Little Mountain, to kind of make it feel like Little Mountain is part of the site. So we have the big mound here and then the little mounds in front of it to create a little more interest. And to create this, we would be getting rid of the asphalt driveway that currently comes all the way up here. We would cut it off. I'm going to skip backwards a little bit. We would cut off the asphalt driveway down below right here. So there'd still be access for the city to have maintenance vehicles come and maintain, but somewhere we would find the optimal place to do it. But there's no need to have an asphalt road coming all the way up like it currently does, because that severs the connection between Little Mountain and the park space currently. And then from this overlook loop, you'd have trailheads like back here. There'd be a connection to to New England Trail. There'd be a connection to the hiking trail around Little Mountain, and then that would return back here to the accessible loop. And so the next stages of this are to go forward to pursue funding for final design and construction next year. But this is the design that we've arrived at so far after processing all of our analysis of the site, listening to your input. So at this point, we'd like to open it up if anyone has any final questions or comments, and we'll have a discussion about where we're at and what the next steps are.
Yeah, and we've got a pretty small group, so if you just, I think, feel free to turn your video on if you have video and make a comment. It's often helpful if you have clarifying questions for to start with those first. So if anybody has clarifying questions, which means not your opinion, but something you want to understand better about the design, let's start with those. Any questions?
Looks like looks like Luis has one. Yep.
Got the news sorted. Okay, let's do it. I think it's great. I think listening as somebody with some issues, I've been wondering two things. The first is, if it's possible to go a little more for comfort and a little less for dramatic views and reveals. I didn't totally follow, but I mean, you get all the way up to the top, and most of the summer, there's going to be a fight over the bits with a little bit of shade. Hasn't worked out which way the shade's coming, and otherwise you just turn around and go back. And what one of the things that attracts me about it is the opportunity not just to do the walk, but to experience, hang out a bit in this more natural setting. So I'm just going to throw that out there. And the second, and I'm not sure because I haven't walked it or seen it, but when you're showing the path going up, which is great, for somebody who's not in a wheelchair but periodically needs a cane or other help, some of those curves and all, is there any thought to providing the odd kind of handrail, because those can make even a natural wood one? Just throwing that out. That's all.
Thanks. I think that on that last point, the total trail length that we're showing, if you include the loop at the park at the top here, is about 2,000 linear feet. And having railings everywhere would, you multiply it by that length, would be too expensive. But when we look at the precise route that the trail is going to take, we may find that there's some places or certain intervals where a railing would be helpful. We're assuming that there's going to be a need for certain amenities along the way. But because of the sheer length of it, we kind of have to treat it like it's a hiking trail, but it's one that's, more accessible than you're otherwise going to find.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was saying. I was trying to visualize and imagine walking it, and that's pretty hard to do if you're not actually there. But there were odd bits, and I thought, oh gosh, if you could just lean on something instead of, like, there were a few curves. And okay, that's what I'm asking for. And I mean, trying to translate these photos, or even you're an architect, but trying to translate what on Earth 2,000 feet means. Thank you for thinking of it. I'll leave it there.
I think it's a great observation, and it's this unique time that we're in with the inability to gather in groups. I mean, we definitely, when we started this project, it was before any impacts related to COVID, and so we would have definitely had the opportunity for a site walk and get people out there. I think the visuals are great, but it is hard to understand that the way the trail lays out on the map is intended to make it as flat as possible. So it looks like you'd be going uphill and turning really sharp, but it's actually, when you're out there, it'll be more gradual. But I think in the final, so we are in the process of finishing this part, and then if we're awarded the grant, the plans will get developed as construction level drawings. And I think that may be the point when, if there is an area that appears necessary, there could be railings. And I think the Mutters Field area has one area, and I think that has an actual switchback that's in close proximity, and so they did put a railing. So I think it would definitely come up in the final construction plans if there was an area that warranted that for sure.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or clarifying questions, or should we just open it up for general discussion? It's hard to tell with all your videos turned off. Let's open it up for general discussion. Anybody else have anything they want to say about this? I've gotten a couple comments by chat, people saying that they think it'll be great. Laura Heon from Easthampton Media said, how do people feel about this in their backyard? So there are a couple neighbors on the call. You're welcome to address that directly, or I can say what you've said by chat.
And I'll jump in too. I mean, I think the image that Dan had, where there are some areas identified that are sensitive, and I think we are very cognizant of that. And so in the project budget and the way that it gets shaped moving forward is that there will be an allocation to provide plantings or a fence to accommodate the areas that are the most close in proximity. So I think that's important. I mean, it's definitely an important project for us that we treat the properties immediately surrounding it, sensitively, because they're going to be neighbors to this, and we want their support as well. So we're definitely thinking about that.
And by and large, a lot of the developed parts of this park are going to be, and trail are going to be well away from people's yards. And that's one of the goals in laying out the trail route, is to, both for the sake of the neighbors and for the users of this site to feel like they're out in nature. It's kind of a mutually beneficial thing to try to keep it away from people's yards, and where it's unavoidable to get a little closer, then that's where we would try to limit those places and plant them up so that there's privacy screening.
So we got one chat from somebody who said we're across the street and love the design, and another who said I'm a direct neighbor and Jeff has been great in meeting with me and addressing my concerns. So thank you all for support.
That's good.
Yeah, and so we can hang here for another couple minutes without more questions. I mean, I think it's important for we are recording this, and I will share it back out. I have been using the planning department's Facebook page as a primary method to get the information out, and it's not perfect to do that, but it is a way that works actually pretty well to share information. And what I would ask Dotson and Flinker, and I'm hoping I guessed the answer right, is that we could get access to this presentation, the slideshow portion of it, and we can post that on the website. And then just to recap, I mean, it looks like we're going to have to do another closing poll. I just wanted to just say that, the timeline, sorry, it popped up right in the middle. The timeline is that this is not an immediate construction project. So I just want everyone to know that what we're gearing up for is a July 15th application. And I said this at the beginning, but I think it's just important that people understand. If we are awarded the funding, it would potentially be in November. And then that would be when the project would actually be real, and we would start developing different types of outreach and coordination. Just to make sure that we've talked about it in this meeting too, is, there has been a discussion about maintenance of this project. And I think it's important for any city project to be thinking about this. The discussion is really to try to create an endowment. So to this point, we've sought no donations or financial support from anyone other than the CPA committee and the state. So we would be looking to organize a program where people could donate to help continue the maintenance on this property. And that's actually something that's pretty common through Kestrel Land Trust and Pascomet Conservation Trust. So once, or if we are awarded the grant, then we would start to prepare and build that program. But it's a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario where we don't yet have a real project unless we're funded. And then once we're funded, which I'm optimistic we will be, but that's when we would start kind of this idea of an endowment for maintenance. So I just wanted to make sure we said that.
Yeah, so somebody asked if it's, is it possible that if funding isn't secured, we'd go with a different, cheaper design? So I think the strategy right now is to see if we can get the whole thing funded. And
Yep.
if the possible grants don't come through, then we could relook at that. Like Dan said, the parking has a cost to it, the trail itself has a cost to it, and those are both significant. And then just putting the top of the site back together is additional cost. So we'd have to look at whether it's possible to do something that's cheaper and makes a whole place.
Yep. And I will say one more thing about the park program in particular. I mean, it's a very competitive program, but one of the reasons why we decided to keep this project going forward, even despite all the COVID, things, is that we might be in a good position to be highly competitive we've maintained the community outreach and the design work through COVID, where some communities may not have been able to do that. So it helps us be more competitive with the funding sources. And I will say that another opportunity would be oftentimes if you're not awarded the first time you apply, we get feedback from the grant administrators, and they give feedback, and then we would apply next year. And often if you're not awarded, they do give you direct encouragement to reapply next year. So if we were not successful, we would know in November, and I think we would begin to formulate a process to maybe reapply next July.
There's another comment about maybe it's possible that Easthampton businesses could donate their employees for cleanup as community service kind of thing, assuming the employees are willing and able. So yeah, I think that's another possibility. We've talked a little bit about whether it'd be possible to have volunteers do some of the trail construction, particularly for the Little Mountain portion of the property. And it's possible that volunteers could contribute to the shrubland portion of the property, basically doing some tree cutting and so on. Are there any other comments? I just shared out the poll results. Looks like 5 of you responded. 1 supports the project and 4 strongly support the project. 4 of you feel like the design is headed in the right direction, and 1 thinks the design is great. People are interested in supporting the project through voicing support for funding from the city and volunteering to help build it and donating money to support it. And it looks like people expect to use it. A couple people think they'd use it weekly. 1 person thinks monthly, and a couple people think they'd use it a few times per year. So thanks for responding to the poll. It's helpful to always get a feel of the temperature of the room, so to speak.
Great. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate everyone hanging out on a beautiful Saturday morning to do this. And again, we'll post the video of this as well as the PowerPoint presentation, and then I'll be giving people updates as we get ready to apply in July. So I think unless there's anything else, Dylan or Dan, this has been great, and I really appreciate the work of Dotson Flinker. It's been really nice. Some of these images I'm seeing for the first time. I understand the concept of the project, but some of these images are great, and it's really helpful to see the visuals, and I'm excited to be part of this project.
Dan, can you switch to the last slide there of just contact information?
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to provide further comments, you can contact me. I'm going to stop sharing results, and hopefully that will make it go away on your screen. If not, you can move that poll result window out of the way. Feel free to contact Jeff Bagg, and his contact info is there, or you can reach out to Dan and I directly. If you're going to use email, might as well send it to all of us at one time. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to making this thing become reality.
All right,
Great.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.